Three, two, one. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Altacast number 28, I believe. I'm Boramy. I'm the lead designer for A Township Tale, and I'm joined here again with.
I'm Joel. I'm the lead programmer.
Yep. And so today we're talking about a fairly special topic. We're talking about A Township Tale on Quest. So about a week and a bit ago, we announced that we were going to start testing a Quest version of A Township Tale. And that means, and we're talking about standalone Quest here. We're not talking about Oculus with Link or anything like that. It's going to be straight up for Oculus Quest. And that includes both Quest 1 and 2. So kind of both devices, not Quest 2 specifically or Quest 1 only, like just both of them. And part of what we want to answer today or discuss are some of the changes between, or some of the differences, I suppose, between the Quest version and the PC VR version, how it's remotely possible to get A Township Tale on Quest, and also some of the kind of more specific questions that people have. We've got we kind of curated some topics that we thought people were interested about, and so Joel's kind of got them listed down, and we're going to be going through them.
Yep. So the first kind of topic that I've got here is just going over a little bit of our testing sort of thing. So as a lot of you know, we rolled out an announcement saying we're looking for testers, and we've had a lot of responses, way more than I expected, which is good. We haven't yet, as of recording, and I don't think we will have as of this being released, contacted anyone for that big wave of testing coming up. So if you haven't gotten an email, don't freak out, don't feel like you've missed out. It's probably also worth mentioning there'll be different waves of testing that'll get bigger and bigger as we go, and assuming all goes well, we're going to do another test which is even bigger. And so even if you miss this first wave, which I hope will be the week of this video coming out, you might make it in the following wave. Hopefully that answers, because lots of people have been asking in Discord whether they should have gotten an email.
So we're gonna be letting people know in the Discord, to check your emails, and also I suppose just keep applying. I guess if you haven't already applied and you're wondering, just apply anyway. We haven't decided, how big each phase will be and how many people. Like the exact number, I think, is not specifically decided. It's probably going to be picked fairly at a bit of a mix, pretty much there are team members who are kind of curating the list and to some degree and looking through that, and they'll be in charge of that process. In terms of time window, relatively soon compared to other things. It's not something as far away as like the housing feature. It's something that's kind of happening in the very near future.
Yep. Okay. Next thing on my topic list is optimizations. In my notes here, I've broken that up into two categories, and I'll brush over the first one really quickly because it's already been covered. And that is we've been working on a lot of cross-platform optimizations, so ones that benefit both PC and the Quest platform. A lot of those have started, I guess, being integrated into the PC version of the game, the released version, and Victor and Serena and Boramy delved into that a little bit 2 Altacasts ago.
Yeah.
So that's category 1. We'll likely see more of that sort of stuff going on in the future. But then we've got category number 2, which is effectively optimizations which are at least at this stage, specific to the quest. Um,
Yeah.
Boramy, do you want to talk about those ones
Yes.
a bit
So
more?
there's some differences between how a quest and a PC like kind of process things and render things. The short of it is there are some things that are not supported on Quest that we utilize a lot in PC. Or it's not that it's not supported, but it's just more costly to do so. Um, and it's and then there's things that the Quest is a little bit uh, like I guess prefers this type of rendering more, and we've really kind of gone all out to just make sure that the Quest version can work and be performant because you know it's I guess it's a little it's more memory management stuff. But basically, some of the graphical differences you can expect are particularly to do with something called kind of opaque and transparent rendering. So opaque is something kind of like this brush I've got here. It's that Joel cannot see because we're recording separately. But this is you can't really see through the you can't see through the wood part of the brush. It's just completely solid. But then here we have a cup of coffee that you can see kind of things through it. So rendering things transparent on PC is not so bad. It's something that PC GPUs can handle pretty well. But that's something that's actually quite costly to do on Quest. So anything that's transparent in the game has to be opaque, just so that we can keep running the experience of the game.
Yeah.
So we've kind of taken a no holds barred approach to making sure that the Quest version is performant, and that means that it will visually look very different to what you might be used to on the PC VR side.
There's also,
yeah, like
I would say the most drastic change is there's a different lighting engine on the
yeah.
on the Quest version.
So you're referring to deferred and forward?
No, as in
Oh
well,
yeah, that's
yes.
right.
So
Yeah.
we use a different rendering. We use a different kind of lighting rendering pipeline, but we also um, basically Victor's put together a bit of custom tech to facilitate the fact that Township Tale is a game of many lights.
Yeah.
We actually early on made some technical decisions that is very different to a lot of VR developers because we wanted a lot of lights. And unfortunately, the kind of technical limitations of developing for Quest means that we can't actually use the tech that we use on PC. So Victor's actually worked on some custom lighting tech to try and maintain as close as possible a similar lighting experience without the in a way that actually will run on a Quest device.
Yeah.
So there's some differences there as well. It's actually really difficult to explain what it looks like. It's quite a interesting sort of
It's
visual change.
it is quite different. The there's like we can't really describe it. It looks a bit different. Just the way that that things catch light, I suppose, is rendered just differently on the model and the textures and things like that. That's something that I don't think we'll do a good job explaining in the Altacast.
No.
But that that is probably one of the biggest visual changes. On top of that, there's lower resolution textures to make sure that stuff still works. There's lower rendering distances, lower loading distances. So there's quite a number of changes. So don't expect the entirety of what you've experienced on PCVR or what you've seen in footage to just come over on Quest. We do want to manage expectations. That visually we've done a lot of optimization work to try and preserve the gameplay aspect of A Township Tale as much as possible, so that all of the mechanics and one thing we wanted to make sure I think still happened is that the your swords and stuff like that still deform when you're forging. That's something that's really unique to A Township Tale that we know people really enjoy about our game. that we wanted to keep in. So some of the other visuals, I guess, compromises we made are to make sure that we keep those sort of things. Same deal with woodcutting, and those are considered, I suppose, like higher priority things because they're quite special visual feedback interactions that we have.
There's two big things that we really wanted to avoid in this whole process, and we've successfully done so. The first is having to kind of make the quest. So, in case it hasn't been clear, the quest version, we'll delve into this a bit later in the Altacast, but the quest version will be a different version to the game than the main Township Tale on PC VR. And over time, we'd like to bring these closer together and maybe one day in the future merge it all into one. But right now, we're dealing with them separately. But one of the things we really wanted to avoid was having to change too much of the quest version. Like, we didn't want to have to strip down the town and make it a flat, tiny little town field or something. We really wanted to hold to the same world and experience. And we've done that. And the other thing we really wanted to avoid was having to tear down the PC version's experience. Like, we didn't want to have to down-res all the PC textures just to facilitate a quest version existing. And that's part of why right now they are still separate, because we have made these changes, which we know, we know Quest people will appreciate because it means that the game will run on Quest. But we know some PC players wouldn't appreciate coming to the PC version.
Yeah. So there's some core differences. So I guess leading into what Joel was referring to with the differences between the Quest. Most of the features that came out last year in 2020 are not going to be featured in the Quest version to begin with. It's something that we're kind of working through porting slowly. So that mainly includes the forest, the climbing tower, and the combat trials. Those are the three main bits that are not there. And so they've been they're obviously very large tasks. If you think back towards the transparency dilemma that we have with Quest, you'll know that the forest has a lot of leaves and foliage and things like that. It's not a ton of assets, but it does create the visual aesthetic of the forest. And so that's something that has to be kind of carefully worked through.
It's also it's also a little bit more technical, but it's also a procedural environment. And one of the things that Victor and Serena have really, really made use of is the fact that when they know where things are going to be, because they're static, they can do all sorts of trickery to optimize that. But as soon as you throw them in an environment where nothing is actually preset, that becomes a very different kind of optimization
challenge. So that's one of the core differences. The other one is going to be a bit about how servers and players and stuff like that works. So obviously, being those two differences, there is no crossplay between, like, doing this, for as long as the fact that they're separate builds, there's not going to be true crossplay between the two versions. So Quest users won't be able to join PC servers. PC players won't be able to join Quest servers, at least for quite a while.
And it's worth noting that's not just during the testing stage. If all goes well and we release this, that will be the case going forward for the foreseeable future, at least. Like, you'll see that, hopefully the Quest version catches up to the PC version in many regards, and but that will be a gradual process. So
the one thing to note, there's a big reason for that is, we try to be quite strict with how the Quest with what the Quest have and things like that. The last thing we want to do is kind of, I guess, like, corrupt your headset in any kind of way.
more just we going onto a new platform is a good opportunity for us to try and make sure that from the get-go it's a very it's a very seamless experience, and being able to hold to that will be really, I think, really good for us and really good for players.
Yeah.
And because it's a platform with predefined spec, it's a lot easier to set that expectation on ourselves. Whereas on PC, there's so many different specs rolling around the place that um, it's a lot more varied an experience. So that aspect can be a bit tougher to do.
Yeah. So so that kind of leads into, part of the reason we like with servers, for example, there won't be the same level of control for Quest players as there is for PC players.
Yeah.
So we've seen some really insane stuff that all the PC VR players have built on their server, and that's something that we can't really guarantee will be as allowed on the Quest versions.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because there's a lot of memory management at play.
We will, we'll likely have to quite drastically restrict, or to start off with, likely just disable console access for Quest servers, which I know might hurt people, but that's I guess that's another thing, kind of like the forest, like the tower, like the trials, something that we're going to have to explore and evaluate and roll out over time in the future.
Yeah, it'll have to be something done with more official capacity, I suppose, to just maintain things. And maybe there's some kind of budgeting that we can support for it. But again, like, I guess part of the core game experience of A Township Tale is what has to take precedence over some of these things. I suppose it's kind of like a PC versus a console version of a game.
Yeah. Another aspect that's obviously going to be different between any standalone version of the game and a PC version of the game is that there's not going to be the outer launcher. We have no plans of removing the outer launcher. Personally, I really like the outer launcher. I'm slightly biased. But what that does mean is that we've got all these features, finding a server, adding friends, removing friends, inviting people to your group, all these sorts of things which are currently done in the launcher, now need to, somehow be accessible in a standalone version of the game. And
that should be out by now.
That should be out by
now.
Yeah. So in our last update, I guess, we rolled out the changes to the main menu. So if you haven't seen them, just go to the Reddit. I don't know, find the patch notes for that, and you can see some of the stuff we're doing there. To me, this is another example of, I guess, the fact that there's changes that might be specifically with standalone in mind, but can benefit PC users as well. So, that's, to me, that's really cool to see.
Yeah. And so there's a bit of a, I guess there's a bit of a question about how we're developing for multiple platforms in terms of managing stuff. For quite a long time, we had kind of these two diverging paths, and that's why that's what most of, like, a lot of the 2020 content kind of was. But now, as of this year, we've kind of reached a point where actually we are running both, both builds are happening from the same version of the game, but the quest has just like the quest builds and scenes just have things that doesn't have things that are on the PC version.
A lot of toggles and switches in both the building and the runtime side of things.
So that means that most of the stuff now that the technology to support both platforms is kind of in one place, and it's the same place that Joel and I are working on housing, for example, and that means that we can do our work trying to support both. So future work being done is currently kind of aiming to be to be compatible cross-platform in terms of like functionality, and it's a matter of kind of catching up the stuff that takes a bit longer from last year at this point.
Yeah. So it's it's worth noting over the course of 2020, we were vaguely aware of these goals to be on the Quest platform, but we didn't have a lot of the optimizations or technology or anything. So especially with the forest, which was really early on, developing anything with Quest in mind, or even testing on a Quest headset, just wasn't possible. The game literally didn't run. So there's no way we could try and keep in mind that we want to, be a bit more aware of how we do certain things, maybe, but we really just couldn't. So it's awesome. It's really awesome that right now, if we wanted to, we could boot up our house building demos on the Quest platform and give that a test, which is as Boramy said, hopefully means that it's not going to be the case that Quest is constantly
catching
a year behind or something, because things are actually being developed to work on both from the get-go.
Yeah.
I only have one more thing on my dot point list, and that is, we obviously get a lot of questions about, how are we going to get the game? When's the game getting released? All sorts of stuff which is about the release of the game. At this stage, we don't have any information to give about that sort of thing. We're focusing on testing. We're focusing on making sure the game runs, making sure the game is, enjoyable. With some of the changes, we obviously don't want the game to not be fun, whatever. I don't think that's a risk, but I'm just saying these are things that we're making sure of during the testing process. We're going to scale up testing over time. And hopefully what that means is we'll be in a position to make really, firstly, fix any problems that there might be, but make really educated decisions going forwards. And when we have information to share, we will then share said information. But at this point, you can ask us as many times as you want, but we just don't have answers for those sorts of questions. That's my list done.
Okay.
Anything else that we have?
Let me look through Discord real quick to see if there was any other points mentioned that people are interested in.
Here's a question which we haven't actually talked about, but is there any potential that certain future updates may not be released on Quest? Oh wait, it is the other way around. May not be released on Quest, but will only be released on PC. That kind of goes along the vein of what we were saying. There may be situations where the Quest version is lagging behind in many ways. As we said, initially it's not even going to have the 2020 features. So it is quite likely the case that there will be some fragmentation and differences in the way the updates of the two platforms would work.
Yep. Some of the content from 2020 may not come in the order that it did in 2020. So because I think you might expect something like the climbing tower to maybe come before the forest for Quest, because scale of feature wise, even as big as the tower is, there's actually not a ton of assets. It's nothing procedural about it. It's something that the team that's been working on Quest is very familiar with how to implement and how to port. The procedural stuff is something that requires some more kind of, I guess, technology on how memory and stuff like that works.
And yeah, and in terms of the other way around, um, it's quite it's quite unlikely that anything drastic will happen to the like any gameplay will come to the Quest version before PC. That our plan is for gameplay to be developed. Well, as we've mentioned, developed for both platforms going forwards in the future. But quite likely that any gameplay that comes out will come out either to both platforms at once or to PC first.
Yeah. Yeah,
Just
there's quite a like. I mean, with housing, for example, I think we can surmise that a lot of like, even though internally we might have gotten the feature working on Quest, you may not even have the environment to get the resources you need on the Quest version yet if the forest is not around and things like that. So we have to make sure that even though stuff works, that we release things in a way that the gameplay loop still makes sense for people. Yeah.
There's also something we kind of skipped over is when we were talking about kind of limitations or like restrictions on the any Quest version. On top of the console, will likely, at least to start off with, restrict the number of players on the platform as well, in terms of on any one server at a time, yeah. which is another difference that some people have actually requested for the PC version as well. And one of the reasons we're doing that is because it does guarantee a quality level of experience.
Yeah, we have a benchmark that we can work with.
Yeah, so if we, it doesn't matter how much you optimize a game, if you don't have a player limit and 5,000 people join that server, it's gonna lag. That's just how resources work. Obviously, there's a cost of a player, and that's going to grow with every player joining. So there's likely going to be some other kind of things around that sort of area that may be different. Again, a lot of these things are likely to change or we'll have more information of over the course of testing. But that's just where we're at this point. I couldn't even tell you what the limit is or is going to be. I believe we have some number in place, but again, that's something we'll be addressing more over the course of testing. I'm just scrolling through Discord as well.
Yeah, I think we're gonna. Else. I mean, I think we can kind of say that we're going to start off with an 8-player limit.
8-player?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
I actually genuinely didn't know that.
Yeah, it's 8 players is the current number that we're going to be for the testing phases and for the foreseeable future. 8 players is kind of what we're working with.
Yeah. Cool. I can't really see any other questions. Obviously, as always, if you have questions about this or anything to do with Township Tale, there's going to be the
Q&A link.
Question link below. If your question is not related to the quest, hold up a second before you post that question because we're actually going to answer questions now. But yeah, if it's specific to quest, before you forget about the question, feel free to throw that in the Q&A link because I guess if we know the answer, we will answer it in the next Altacast.
Yeah. All right, and so we're gonna stop recording real quick just to make sure that the 3 to 4 things I'm recording are all gonna save correctly, and then we're gonna start again with the Q&A. Okay, 3, 2, 1, clap. 3, 2, 1, clap. 3, 2, 1, clap. All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Q&A. Joel had to go somewhere. He's got some house finding stuff he's got to do because I think he's moving out soon, unfortunately. So, yep, it's just me now, and I'm gonna answer some of the questions on the Altacast. So today we're gonna be answering mostly um, non-housing related questions. Well, I'll answer any quest ones that show up if people have asked quest questions here, and uh, again we're gonna save some of the housing questions for the next, not next Altacast, but the next housing-based Altacast. I don't know if it's gonna be the next one yet. All right, so let's go. There's some good ones here, so it's gonna be good fun. What are your thoughts on the volcano area with molten turbinas and worms that spit lava? I've got good thoughts about it. Um, Molten turbinas is something that and worms that spit lava is something I immediately considered when the creatures were being made, just because it makes sense. Um, yeah, like I know lore reasons that makes the worm one a bit different. But they're definitely things I've thought about. A volcanic area is obviously something that I've really thought about because that's kind of what the trials look like a bit. One of these days we are going to kind of work the combat trials a bit differently. They have they're somewhat have their own kind of enemy for the biome that they're in mind, and the levels and things like that might change, and so maybe you'll see that idea being extrapolated a bit more. Did Boramy just confirm dragons? Dragons as a concept are very commonly used. There's no major reason, like aside from the fact that I think we can kind of come up with something a bit more of a unique take on the dragon concept. I personally want it to be a really good dragon. I don't want it to just feel like a big flying bat, I guess, that kind of like flies in the spot and plays fairly default animations. There's I think Joel and I talked a while ago about flying creatures in Township Tale, and the phantoms are a bit of an exception to this to some degree, but we don't typically like a flying creature that's just actually a regular grounded creature, but it's just animated to kind of fly up in the air a little bit. We like something that has velocity and can swoop and dodge the environment and things like that, because that could make for a more interesting flying enemy. So that's something that we want to kind of roughly try out. In this official concept art, are the ruins on the right the televator? And if so, is the tower looking thing near the top left the climbing tower? Kind of, but not quite. So this person's referring to this concept art I did on stream a long time ago of these snowy mountains. There's somebody in like a rice farmer hat, kind of overlooking this deep valley, and then there's kind of like the prongs of ruins that kind of look like the televator, and then there's a big tower with a bit of like a protruding bridge from it. Not really. I didn't think too much about, aside from the fact that it's the same architecture style as the ruins in the game. I didn't think about it being the televator or anything like that. I think because I think this predates it, if I remember correctly. But I knew that those were kind of aesthetic things that matched a little bit. There's a capsule type of building in the center of the picture as well. That one doesn't really match anything. That one's just me doodling random shit. Yeah. But still kind of like an aspirational piece of art. When can we see night vision potions working? So most potion related things and particularly magic effects are likely going to get reworked when alchemy comes out. Yeah, I think people like a straight up night vision potion that lets you see things exactly in the dark is very overpowered. We don't want to completely remove the lighting system, like the need to light things because you've made a potion. Which is why that the current one kind of just creates a light around you. That's pretty much what the balancing act was for that. But don't expect it anytime soon, I guess. Shouldn't the Phantom Guard's minions attack the people around the person wielding the sword? The amount of hits to trigger the mist effect is also quite low, though the guard is quite useless since you can't utilize it in a practical way. So, the Phantom Guards, the Phantom minions attacking the wielder is the trade-off you get for the amount of damage buff you get from having the guard. The guard actually increases the damage output of the blades attached to it. And the amount of hits to trigger the mist effect depends on the amount of damage the sword is trying to output. So what this means is that the current version of the Phantom Guard is not necessarily, despite the fact that it's really hard to acquire, it's not great when you're using it on high damaging weapons like I guess the Valiant Blades or anything like that. It makes it a bit more suitable to buff up your lower tier weapons. And so that's kind of a nice gift for new players. This obviously doesn't match, like you have to kill quite a number of phantoms to get it, which are difficult enemies because of their mechanics. But that's, I suppose, the balancing act. In the future, once we have better enchantments or actual enchantment mechanics like gems and socketing and that sort of thing, there will be ways to upgrade Phantom Guards to do it. But part of the thing is I didn't want the Phantom Guard to be to double down on being super good for endgame players as well as being like good for the entire spectrum of players. Just because already Valiant tier weapons are really, really powerful. Would you introduce bleeding if you add bandages and more healing? There may be a bit of a bleed out effect, kind of like damage over time type of deal. Depending on whether or not it's something that lasts a long time or if it's something that's kind of immediate, is up to balancing and kind of gameplay mechanics. But whether or not you'll see actual blood and things like that, maybe not. We try to be quite a bit less gory as far as games go. Like already making the dice leg and the babu meat felt a little like, oh, like now we've got slightly bloodier looking meats existing in the game. But I think that's about the threshold that will go out in terms of like visual. Like you're not gonna see a chopped off arm or anything like that, or not a gory one at least. You might come across some kind of creature that is compositionally weak, but it's not going to be overly violent. Poison Shmichi hat when? Maybe when we feel like it. I don't know. Shmichi hats are quite popular as a cosmetic, so we just gotta find the right reason to celebrate it. When will the special bags get some love? The normal bag outperforms them all except for the Forger bag. They'll get more love once housing comes out. They're probably going to get a bit more of a buff, and I think the reason for using them will also grow. The biggest reason people don't use special bags is because they've got nowhere to store them, so that they can swap out for different things. And all of that was completely intentional, knowing that housing was going to solve this particular problem. Do you guys have plans to add a tool that polishes our weapons, making them shiny? Yep. We do have some plans. I'm not going to go too much into it because it's quite far away. And it's just down to, if we were doing smaller style updates like we used to in 2019, you might have seen something in that vein. But since we're working on larger scale things, a lot of these types of mechanics don't, they kind of get put on the back burner a bit. Whether or not they'll make them shinier is probably not the case. It's more of a chance that as you have them right now, it's as shiny as it gets, and they'll get duller from what you currently have. Could name tags for backpacks be a thing? Yes, they could be a thing. Again, that's like kind of like a smaller update type thing that we could maybe do at some point. I've prototyped some backpack crafting stuff when I was making the specialized bags that kind of fit in this vein. It's just a matter of the process of acquiring all of this information and things like that. Very possible though. Are onions, carrots, and garlic planned to be plantable someday? Yep. Yep, they are. Not much more to say about that. Like, there's a lot of questions asking about like outstanding things that are like not quite meshed into everything else, and that's just a matter of when we want to support the official mechanics surrounding that, like farming, then we'll evaluate things more properly. Uh, yeah. This is a question we've answered before. Any ideas for more blacksmith tools and molds? Yeah, we have lots of ideas. They'll come in similar form to how the Hebios ones come, and when we have good enough reason to add them. Uh, right now, there's not enough reason to have different swords. There's an aspect of the housing preview's got a bit of, if you're not supporting and you haven't played it yet, the housing preview has players carrying these large ladders and these planks that have quite a bit of weight to them in terms of like manipulation weight. It's something that we're not going to support for weapons or tools out of the gate. It is something that we're going to internally experiment with and really think about. I personally really like it. I've tried it a little bit just to see how it feels. There's a lot of like caveats we have to match. Like it took a lot of custom work to kind of get it to behave accurately to what I was making. But the having this weight, I'm not saying this will happen, by the way. This is not it's not something we've discussed with people. This is me taking the liberties of me being the only person in this Altacast to talk about it freely. That will have it's a nice new stat to play with on weapons, because now we can it gives us a wider spectrum with which to balance things with. So, for example, currently a lot of damaging weapons are fairly tight in terms of the amount of damage they can deal, because we know there's like this incredibly fast attack speed that players have based on how fast they can move and kind of the skill of their weapons. Having a heavy hitting tool on a short handle makes it really good for high output damage, which is why a lot of people use great swords, for example, on the metal handles, because you can swing hard and fast with it, and deal tons of damage. But if we could slow that down, then that means that we can spread out these damage values from weapons to be even wider, so that you can have a really high damaging Valiant Greatsword, but it's much slower to attack with. And so that kind of feeds back into the idea of making more special builds where you prefer fighting slower, like doing fewer attacks, but hitting hard, and maybe you don't prefer that. Maybe you like just kind of swinging as fast as you can. But then obviously you can't use the large weapons to do that. You have to use kind of smaller, lighter weapons. You have to get closer, put yourself at a bit more risk. So something that I'm considering quite strongly. It will mean a complete kind of, revamp of things that you have to get used to as part of the game. It's just about a matter of, will it feel? There's a balance between responsiveness and value that we have to kind of strike quite well. Things can't be too heavy is essentially the end goal. Like when things are really heavy and they're just but they still feel like they could kind of be usable in the right scenario. This thing for you as a player to distinguish that line is really difficult. Let's see. Okay, here's a quest related question. Should have answered this one earlier, maybe. How will community servers work with Quest users and PC users having different servers? Will we now get a server for each platform and have to maintain 2 servers, or will it automatically split our servers into 2 servers and have to maintain each individually? A bit of that depends on the account situation, which we haven't fully distinguished yet. I believe we're kind of going to be, yeah. maybe by the time this Altacast comes out, like I'll have a clear answer about this particular question, or maybe it'll be answered already by the announcement of the if this next testing phase is going through kind of how we've scheduled. But it's likely that they'll just be two separate servers, and you just manage each individually. Like it's just going to be treated differently. Do you guys have any plans for how I experience my work going forward? Not only skill trees, but how it is also gained. Check the last Altacast. I think we answered this question, or the one before that, and we talk about changes to experience using per skill use as opposed to per hit. Anyway, there would be an APK download available for the majority of the community to play without a PC. This was a month-old question. We're probably not going to give... I don't think we're giving straight APK downloads. At the time of this question, where it's pre-Quest testing announcement, us just kind of like hitting a build APK instead of exe button on Unity is not going to make the game work for your Quest. There's so many differences between how technologically the two systems work that it's just never is that easy of a process. There's the only other way it works is if you've built something that's designed for APK and then you're just building a Windows exe version of it. That's fairly straightforward, typically. But the other way around, it's just not how technology works. Okay, Joel liked this question when we were kind of browsing through them earlier. Why can I move my hips after visiting the map center? It looks cool. Why not keeping it all the time? Well, that's actually... so for people who remember, a long time ago, we had hips moving when players move around. That's something we've reintroduced in the Housing preview that may make it to the main game pretty soon. But at this was asked quite a while ago. And the reason it stopped working in the main game is because there was this bug where something changed about the player and they started calculating it. It started capping out. Okay, so essentially, if you're a far enough away distance from like this point, which typically is like your like where your smooth locomotion kind of character movement is. If you're too far from that point, then the hips will kind of stay in place. And that's how we control teleporting, for example. So that when you teleport, your hips don't kind of like get stuck pointing the way you came for ages until eventually everything catches up and it snaps back, it kind of moves back into place. That's the countermeasure. But then the initial point got changed to, so there's a bug, so that was at origin, which means that it always thinks you're in this teleport mode, so it always kept your hips firmly in place. But when you approach the map center, because I think we're maybe only looking on like two axes for this movement, your hips can move again. So bit of like a interesting find there from whoever asked this question. Another question about flintlocks and firearms. Answer is no. There's a lot of gun games out there. We're interested in other types of interactions beyond guns. It's not a great fit for the game either. Can we add a full tutorial into tech support that explains the whole process for Quest users, how to get virtual desktop running? So many new players ask about it. You can do it. If it's good enough, we'll consider pinning it and things like that. But the reason we haven't is because most of us don't know how to do it on the team. We don't use virtual desktop to try and play standalone, so we haven't really done it. But if you're interested, if you want to do that for the community, feel free to. And if it's a reliable and if it's good, then we'll pin it officially. I don't see why we wouldn't. The game in its current state is pretty hard to run even on average gaming PCs. What changes are you thinking of making it to get to run on Quest? So we answered this a bit in the previous part, but pretty much doing everything possible to get it to run on Quest. The PC version is hard to run because we're trying to. There's an aspect of like the absolute vision of the game that we have, and it's somewhat it kind of pushes the boundaries of what PCs can do. A lot of people look at Township Tale and think it's like a simple looking game, and that it shouldn't be this hard to render. But there's so much going under the hood beyond what you can imagine on technology level. Like, yeah, we use stylized kind of cartoony textures, but there's no real difference between that and like a realistic looking game. Actually, it's still, like 512 by 512 textures or smaller than that. So same amount of pixels per texture roughly. A lot of kind of shader trickery. Like we actually do less, a little less when it comes to certain things. Like we don't tessellate. We don't do. We don't currently do a lot of like surface mapping. Some games, for example, like I think The Division did a talk about it. They essentially map out every object in the game with a kind of a surface definition that describes how much sound it absorbs, and that kind of affects a lot of the acoustics of their sound effects. And that's like that process is something that you never see as the player. You don't have any concept of like, hey, the game doesn't run well. Why is the the game looks pretty simple. I mean, this Division looks visually quite nice, but the game looks pretty simple. Why does it struggle to run? Well, it's because it's got a lot of these underlying systems that are at runtime, and we have a similar case. Between the day-night manager, our shadows are dynamics. All the lights that we have, the zero loading screen process for Township Tale, aside from like your initial joining of a new server or joining a server, like that's the only time you're really in a loading screen. Those are all things that kind of push the envelope of what games can do, and that's what bogs down performance on top of and then rendering wise, we're gonna optimize as we go. The housing update we'll see, hopefully, I mean it's guaranteed to, because of the way we're working to be more optimized than what's currently already in the game. Will you guys ever add armor back? Yes. And how would it work with cosmetics? Again, answered this before, but the basics of it is that it'll probably hide the outermost layer of clothing, and I don't mean like the outermost that you're wearing. I mean like the outermost possible that we have, which is kind of like what a lot of jackets and hats do, and it'll hide selectively. But armor will likely only be active when you're in combat. So that's just kind of the compromise between the two systems that we've had to come up with. And okay, I think that roughly does it for for all the non-housing questions. Just giving a quick scan. Okay, there's one more actually. So a couple more questions. I think I've picked the one I'm going to finish on. This is not that one yet. What feature would you have liked to come to the game but decided against for whatever reason? I should have thought of an answer before I picked this one. Let's see. There's one that always kind of haunts Joel and I whenever we think about it. It's not overly useful, and that's why we didn't go for it. But it's the idea of, and it might come back in the future. It's not completely cut. Like nothing's really completely cut from the game. Like there hasn't been a feature that we've worked on and we completely scrapped, like forever. This one is something that Joel and I called PAJAC. It's like an acronym for this long-winded, I can't even remember it. I just know that we called it Pagac. Like Pagac is the spelling of that, and that was used to kind of create, procedural structures, primarily designed for like ruins and things like that. But we were just kind of working at it. It was taking us a while, and it just didn't matter that it existed because there wasn't content, like valuable content to fill those ruins with. And so like I think Joel worked on the system for like a month or two, and then we scrapped it. Something similar might come in the future as like a tool that we might use, or as just a completely procedural thing that we control with like outside parameters. That would have been interesting to have. It would have been interesting to combine that with Forest. But yeah, part of the reason I guess this ties a little bit into Forests and Quest, part of the reason that, in some degrees we held back a bit on like the assets that we made for the Forest. There's other environments that I experimented with, that are part of the forest biomes, that those got cut at the time. Again, not permanently, because they didn't have a real reason to exist other than like different aesthetics. But also, if it didn't provide like an important value aspect to the game, because it doesn't have those like valuable content to put in there yet, I didn't want to add that workload to like the quest port. So this is like, and what to give people more detail, I suppose, since some people might be upset to hear that, but it's a non-wood based, I guess, biome that I was working on in the forest. But there was no reason to go there, like other than the fact that it looked interesting. There's, we don't want to give people more food because there's already plenty of food resources that kind of cover all the bases that need to be covered for what the current system exists. We weren't going to have time to make new enemies, and new enemies wouldn't have dropped anything that feeds back into any of the game loops. Maybe there's a whole Altacast I can do on where we want to add value to the game. There's a chart I made somewhere about where all the resources go and what systems I think feed back into that are valuable to the player. And if something doesn't go back into that system, then it's not worth implementing yet. Or if that system doesn't exist yet, like there's no reason for these things to exist. So that's part of the reason why we take things a bit slower when it comes to content creation. Is because we want things to be valuable, and we don't want to go in a completely linear direction with that. Okay. And the last question is, what is your favorite future feature? All right, let me think. Probably housing is pretty up there. That's like the favorite near future one. The one I'm most excited for in general, though, is kind of like the dungeoning and boss aspect. Someone did ask a question actually about a boss here, pretty much asking like, what are the bosses gonna be? I'm not gonna answer that just yet, but going through the dungeon and boss experience just sounds like it's kind of the end goal that a lot of adventure-based players are looking for. About going out and utilizing their weapons. I'm interested in like some of the dungeon puzzle solving that might be required, some of the combating stuff, and then like the spectacle of the boss fight at the end of that. I think that'll be really cool. And on top of that, I suppose I'm really looking at the Elder game stuff, which comes way later in terms of development. But that's kind of applying modifiers to existing challenges. So if we take the combat trials as an example, there's the default way of kind of completing them, which is you just go in and you fight them. And for many of you there's like a resource cost you put into it to start it. But eventually we may have like modifier items that you can add before when you're starting a trial that makes it more difficult, but also gives you better rewards at the end of it. And that kind of system, if we make it global enough for all these different kind of challenge areas, then it means that you have a reason as a player to revisit old places. and that's how we can keep everywhere in the world. Even though you were here like ages ago, you can come back and there's something valuable to you even after you've done a lot of things. And that can kind of like, that's something we can kind of infinitely scale, because I think the type of player who really likes that, it's kind of like you entering this min-maxing loop almost. And it's kind of really working on like the super high end, like hard, like point of the game where mechanically, like, because mechanically there's a limit to how difficult something can get. There's a point where like mechanically can just get unreasonably unfair. You know, like imagine if you're fighting a good terror, but like every shot it fires just infinite. When it hits something, it infinitely multiplies over and over and over again, and eventually you're just filled with like a screen full of pellets, and you just die. Like mechanically, you know, that's more like making a bullet split off and multiply is, you know, mechanically interesting to do, but it's not infinite. It's not infinitely more difficult. And typically, I think in like RPGs, that's when you're reaching that point where you're trying to infinitely provide difficulty modifiers on stuff. That's when things start to get a bit more like health pool intensive, and like damage wise intensive. Where like it's, you know, if you're not leveled, it's like instant kill, or if you, it's whether or not we'll reach that point. It's a bit different. Like we'll probably explore other ways to make things more difficult so that we're not 100% reliant on just increasing numbers, because that's not super fun. You can expect things similar, maybe not the multiplying one, because it sounds like it gets out of hand already. But you can expect those types of maybe modifiers to come in the future as well. That's kind of what and that kind of leads back to the quest. Not the quest as a headset, but the questing system that Joel and I talked about a few Altacasts ago. I think when we were talking, I think if you look at the cartography Altacast, we talk about player-driven quests and guilds and that sort of thing, and I think that's kind of where some of those end goal modifiers can play a role in. But right, that's it for the Altacast. Thanks a lot for all your questions. We've got a lot more housing questions in this list, so if you've got questions that are not housing related, feel free to drop them. If you do have housing questions, have a look through the list and see if there's a question that you're interested in hearing about. And yeah, that's about it. I'm gonna message Joel and ask him to clear all the non-housing questions from this, because I think I've answered all of them. And yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.